Sophia Mitchell's life had always been a careful balance of routine and responsibility. The small town of Riverton, where she lived, was a place where everyone knew everyone else. It was a community rooted in familiarity, where the shopkeepers recognized your face, and neighbors greeted each other by name. For Sophia, this was both a comfort and a limitation. She'd been born and raised in Riverton and had seen little reason to leave. With her dependable job as an administrative officer at the local government office, she earned just enough to make ends meet. But life wasn't exactly thrilling. Sophia's days had settled into a predictable rhythm: wake up, take care of her teenage daughter, run errands, go to work, and repeat. Every day felt like the one before it. But all of that changed on a Tuesday morning. It was a day like any other. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the streets. The air had a crisp chill to it, signaling the arrival of autumn. Sophia stepped out of her modest home and locked the door behind her. Her daughter, Ashley, was still asleep, the teenager's world revolving around late-night texts and schoolwork, but Sophia had always been the first one up, ensuring the house ran smoothly before heading to work. She had learned to take pride in the simplicity of her life. There were no major ambitions, no grand plans. There was just her daughter, and the steady beat of life in Riverton. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And for someone like Sophia, that steadiness was enough. The small government office she worked at was on the edge of town, a square building with a handful of employees. Most days, it was quiet, with the occasional phone call or visitor to keep things moving. Sophia didn't mind the solitude. She handled the paperwork, filed reports, and made sure the office ran efficiently. She was good at her job, reliable and meticulous. Nobody noticed her too much, but she wasn't the type to mind being in the background. As long as her work was done well, that was all that mattered. But things were different that Tuesday. Sophia had just finished her morning coffee and was sitting at her desk, typing out a few notes for an upcoming meeting, when she heard the sound of a commotion outside the office. The chatter grew louder, and she could hear snippets of conversation floating through the air. At first, she thought it was just another routine dispute, one of the usual issues that came up between townspeople. But the tension in the air felt different that day. Sophia looked out the window to see a small crowd gathering around the entrance to the office. Curious, she stepped outside to see what was going on. Standing in the front of the crowd was Judge Richard Barnes, the local magistrate who ran the courthouse just across the street. He was a fixture in Riverton, a man known for his unwavering authority and no-nonsense approach to the law. The crowd appeared to be waiting for him to address something, but the judge's stern expression made it clear that he wasn't here for casual conversation. Sophia's heart sank as she noticed what was happening. A group of people was gathered around a woman who was being publicly scolded by the judge. The woman, an older African-American woman named Carol, had been accused of violating some town ordinance, nothing serious, but enough for the judge to get involved. Carol had lived in Riverton for years. She was a hard-working woman who ran a small grocery store down the street. She was well respected by most people, but today, the judge was laying down the law, and the crowd was waiting to see what would happen next. Sophia's curiosity got the best of her, and she moved closer to the group, where she overheard the judge issuing a fine. $500, Judge Barnes said sternly, his voice carrying over the crowd. That's the penalty for this infraction. You'll pay it, or face further legal action. Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't believe the severity of the punishment. Carol wasn't the type to break the law, and it seemed like such a small violation. The fine seemed excessive. She could see Carol's face flush with frustration, the weight of the situation sinking in. Carol's hands trembled as she tried to speak, but the judge was resolute. "You can't be serious," Carol said, her voice cracking. "This is ridiculous. I've been living here for years, and I've never done anything wrong. Why are you punishing me like this?" The judge's response was cold and unyielding. Rules are rules. There's no room for leniency. Pay the fine, or you'll be facing more serious consequences. Sophia felt a sense of unease settle in her stomach. She knew Carol wasn't a criminal. This seemed like an overreaction. The judge had always been strict, but this felt different. There was something about the way he delivered the punishment, as though he was enjoying the power he held over Carol. The crowd around them murmured quietly, some people shaking their heads, others remaining silent in agreement with the judge's decision. Sophia couldn't let it go. She had always been someone who stood up for what was right, even if it meant going against authority. It didn't sit well with her that the judge was punishing someone who had contributed so much to the community. She couldn't just walk away. As the crowd began to disperse, Sophia found herself walking up to the judge. Her heart raced with a mixture of determination and fear. She didn't know why she was doing it, but something about the situation gnawed at her, something told her that this wasn't right. "Judge Barnes," Sophia said, her voice steady but quiet. The judge turned his gaze to her, his brow furrowed in mild surprise. "Yes? I don't think you're being fair to Carol," she said, her voice more confident than she had expected it to be. "She's been a part of this community for years. You could at least consider reducing the fine, or find another way to deal with this." The judge's expression hardened. "And who are you to tell me what's fair?" he said sharply. "I'm the one who enforces the law here, not you." Sophia didn't flinch. She had always been the quiet one, but that day, something inside her snapped. "I'm not saying you shouldn't enforce the law. I'm saying you should be fair." For a moment, there was a tense silence between them. The judge looked at her, studying her with an intensity that felt almost like he was assessing her. "You work in the government office, don't you?" he asked, his voice colder than before. Sophia nodded. "Yes." Judge Barnes gave a short, tight-lipped smile. "Well, I'm afraid you don't understand how things work in my courtroom. The law is clear, and I don't make exceptions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a job to do." The word stung, but Sophia didn't back down. "I'm not backing down either. You can't treat people like this." With that, Sophia turned and walked back to the office. She could feel the judge's eyes on her, but she didn't let it stop her. She had made her stand, even if it felt small. What she didn't know, however, was that her words would echo in a way she hadn't anticipated. It was a moment that would lead to something far bigger than she could have imagined. A ripple that would soon become a wave, changing the course of her life forever. That evening, as she sat at home with Ashley, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Something about the encounter with Judge Barnes lingered in her mind. She had no idea how much that one moment was about to alter the course of her future. As she sipped her tea and watched Ashley zone out on her phone, Sophia's thoughts swirled. She couldn't help but wonder if she'd done the right thing. And more troubling still, she couldn't shake the thought that the judge wasn't who he appeared to be. It was a quiet evening, but the storm was already brewing beneath the surface. And Sophia Mitchell had no idea just how much her life was about to change. The next day, Sophia woke to a feeling of unease that had followed her through the night. It wasn't just the heavy weight of the conversation with Judge Barnes lingering in her mind, but something deeper, a sense that she had stepped into a situation far beyond what she had anticipated. As she prepared breakfast for Ashley, who was still grumpy from staying up late the night before, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that everything in Riverton had shifted overnight. The normal, predictable rhythm of her life seemed to have faltered, replaced by a vague sense of impending change. After breakfast, Sophia went through her morning routine as usual. She dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing, just the same professional look she wore every day. Yet today, everything felt off. She was keenly aware of the way her footsteps echoed in the quiet of the house, of the way the sunlight outside seemed to be filtered through a haze of uncertainty. When she kissed Ashley goodbye and left the house, she didn't expect things to return to normal. At the office, the atmosphere was tense. Sophia walked through the entrance to find her colleagues whispering in hushed tones, casting furtive glances at each other. It wasn't unusual for small towns like Riverton to feel like a fishbowl, where everything and everyone was under constant scrutiny. But today, it felt different. A ripple had passed through the town, and it was clear that the events of the day before had left a mark. Sophia sat at her desk, trying to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the scene outside the courthouse. Carol's frustrated face, the judge's icy demeanor, these images wouldn't leave her thoughts. Why had she felt compelled to speak up? Was it because she was tired of seeing people like Carol, good people, being treated unfairly? Or had something more primal been awakened in her, a deep-seated dissatisfaction with the way things were? She couldn't answer that, not yet, but she knew that this incident had stirred something inside her. She had always followed the rules, been content with the status quo, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of urgency, like there was something larger than herself at stake. The day passed slowly, the hum of quiet office work doing little to ease her mind. But around lunchtime, something unexpected happened that only added to the tension. A phone call came for Sophia, and the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Hello, Sophia. This is Judge Barnes," said the voice, smooth but with an edge of command that Sophia couldn't ignore. It was strange, she had barely exchanged words with him outside of their brief confrontation, yet here he was, calling her directly. Her stomach tightened. "Yes, Judge Barnes? I'd like to speak with you." "In person," he said, the tone of his voice making it clear that this wasn't a casual conversation. "I'm sending someone over to meet you." Before Sophia could respond, the line went dead. Her mind raced. What did he want? Why was he calling her now, after everything that had happened? She had thought that the incident had been dealt with, at least as far as she was concerned. Yet, the fact that he had contacted her directly only heightened her anxiety. A knot formed in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation wasn't going to be a simple exchange of pleasantries. An hour later, a man arrived at the office. He was in his mid-30s, well-dressed in a suit, with sharp eyes and an air of authority that made him stand out even in a small town like Riverton. He introduced himself as Mr. Henry Lawson, a private investigator who had been hired by Judge Barnes to handle a matter of legal importance. His demeanor was polite, but there was an unmistakable edge to him, as though he were sizing up Sophia the moment he entered the room. Sophia stood up to greet him, her hand feeling cold as she extended it. "Mr. Lawson, what can I do for you?" He didn't immediately respond to the handshake. Instead, he simply looked her over with a steady gaze, then placed a folder on her desk. "Judge Barnes has requested that you meet with him. He has some things he needs to discuss with you, personally." Sophia's heart rate quickened. "About what?" Mr. Lawson's lips curled into a thin smile. "That, I'm afraid, is something only the judge can explain. But I will say this, it's an urgent matter." Sophia was about to ask more, but before she could, the investigator stood up, gave her a short nod, and left the room as quietly as he had arrived. The folder on her desk seemed to taunt her, its presence heavy with mystery and unspoken threats. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment before she opened it, flipping through the pages inside. There was no immediate explanation, just a letter from Judge Barnes, addressed directly to her. The letter itself was brief but to the point. "Sophia, we need to meet. There is something I must discuss with you in person. You're expected at the courthouse at 4 p.m. today. I trust you'll come." It was the kind of note that commanded obedience, leaving little room for negotiation. But it wasn't the content that unsettled her, it was the urgency, the implied expectation that she would comply without question. This wasn't a polite invitation, it was an order. A chill ran down her spine. What was this really about? As the afternoon dragged on, Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't just ignore this. The way the judge had made his request made it clear that he expected her to show up. There was no other option. But the more she thought about it, the more questions arose. Why was the judge suddenly so interested in her? She had done nothing wrong, and the matter with Carol was hardly worth this kind of follow-up. Was it just a coincidence that this meeting had come so soon after their confrontation? Or had something else been set in motion that she couldn't yet understand? At exactly 4 p.m., Sophia found herself standing in front of the courthouse, the weight of the decision to come bearing down on her. She had no choice but to enter, but the moment she stepped through the front doors, she was hit with an overwhelming sense of foreboding. The walls seemed taller inside, the corridors quieter. Everything about the courthouse felt more imposing, as though the very structure of it had been designed to remind her of the power it contained. She made her way to the judge's chambers, where Mr. Lawson was waiting for her. He didn't say much as he led her through the corridors, his silent presence adding to the tension that already had her on edge. When they finally reached Judge Barnes's office, the door was already slightly ajar, and Sophia could hear the low murmur of voices inside. Mr. Lawson knocked lightly, and the judge's voice called out, "Come in." Sophia took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The judge was seated at his desk, his back to her. His posture was rigid, as though he were waiting for her arrival, his fingers steepled in front of him as he looked over some documents. Without looking up, he spoke in his usual stern tone. "Sit down, Sophia." The words weren't unkind, but they left no room for refusal. Sophia sat across from him, trying to steady her breath, trying to keep her composure. She didn't know what to expect, but she had a sinking feeling that the meeting wasn't going to be as simple as she had hoped. After a long pause, Judge Barnes finally set the papers aside and looked directly at her. His eyes, usually so calm and collected, seemed to pierce through her with an intensity that left her feeling vulnerable. "We need to talk about your involvement in the matter with Carol," he said quietly. Sophia's pulse quickened. "What about it?" The judge leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming more measured. "You've made an impact, Sophia. And it's not just about the fine anymore." For the first time, Sophia felt a chill in the air. Something was happening here, something she wasn't fully prepared for. She couldn't figure out what it was, but she had the distinct feeling that her life was about to change forever. The judge's gaze never left her face, and as she met his eyes, she realized that this meeting was only the beginning of something far more complex and dangerous than she could have imagined. Sophia sat there, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, as Judge Barnes continued to study her. The stillness of the room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in, and every word he spoke seemed to carry more weight than the last. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the strange turn her life had taken. She had never expected to be sitting in this office, facing this man, discussing the events of the previous day in such a serious way. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. The judge's voice broke the silence once again, cutting through the confusion swirling in her mind. "You understand, don't you, that your actions yesterday have consequences?" Sophia nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety crawling up her spine. "I just thought what happened to Carol wasn't fair. It didn't seem right to me." Judge Barnes studied her for a long moment before speaking again, his tone colder this time. "You've made a mistake, Sophia. A serious one." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sophia's stomach twisted. She couldn't understand what she had done wrong. She had stood up for what she believed in. She had questioned the judge, but was that really such a terrible thing? "You see," the judge continued, his voice softening just a fraction, the problem isn't just about Carol or her fine. It's about your role in all of this. You have no idea who you're dealing with, do you? Sophia frowned, her confusion deepening. I don't understand. Who am I dealing with? What do you mean? The judge's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. You have no idea who I really am, do you? I'm not just some small-town judge. I have connections, power that goes far beyond the walls of this courthouse. Power that you've just started to tap into. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a threat, but they were so vague, so cryptic. What was he talking about? What connections? What power? Before she could ask any more questions, the door behind her opened abruptly. Mr. Lawson stepped inside, his presence like a shadow. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes told Sophia that he was there for a reason, and that reason was probably not a good one. The judge gestured for him to come closer, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. Mr. Lawson will explain things to you, Judge Barnes said, his voice taking on an almost dismissive tone. I think it's time you learned the truth about what's happening here. Sophia felt a surge of panic. The truth? What are you talking about? But the judge didn't answer her question. Instead, he turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, his posture indicating that the conversation was over. Mr. Lawson stepped forward and handed Sophia a thick folder, one that looked far more official than anything she had seen before. It was sealed with a red ribbon, and the weight of it made Sophia feel uneasy. Take this, Mr. Lawson said, his voice low and smooth. Everything you need to understand what's really going on is inside here. But be warned, you're not prepared for what you'll find. Sophia's mind reeled. What was this? Why was the judge treating her like she was part of some larger scheme, some conspiracy she didn't even know existed? She didn't want to open the folder, didn't want to learn whatever dark secrets it contained, but she knew that she had no choice. The folder seemed to beckon her, the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she took the folder from Mr. Lawson's hands. The silence in the room grew heavier. The judge didn't speak, and Mr. Lawson remained still, watching her with an unreadable expression. The seconds felt like hours as Sophia tried to steady herself. She opened the folder carefully, half expecting something to jump out at her. But when she saw what was inside, her breath caught in her throat. There were photos, grainy, black and white images, along with documents that looked like official court files. As her eyes scanned the first page, she felt a cold rush of realization. The names on the papers were familiar, but there was something wrong. Something off about the whole thing. She saw the name Carol Donovan, the same woman who had been fined yesterday. But there were other names too, names that she didn't recognize, and references to incidents and cases that she couldn't understand. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her heart pounding faster with each one. She read through legal jargon, terms she didn't understand, but then she saw something that made her blood run cold, a list of people, some of them prominent members of Riverton's community, with details of their financial transactions, their criminal records, and their ties to each other. The connections were startling. Carol was just the tip of the iceberg. The more she read, the more she realized that there was a complex web of corruption and manipulation woven into the fabric of the town. And the judge, Judge Barnes, was at the center of it all. Suddenly, everything clicked. Carol hadn't just been fined for a minor infraction. She had been targeted. She had been part of a much larger scheme, one that involved bribes, blackmail, and illegal dealings. And Sophia, by questioning the judge and standing up for Carol, had inadvertently stumbled onto something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The weight of the realization hit Sophia all at once. She was in over her head. She had thought she was just speaking out for a friend, trying to do the right thing. But now, with the evidence in her hands, she understood the stakes. She was dealing with people who had the power to ruin lives, to destroy anyone who got in their way. And by standing up to the judge, she had made herself a target. Mr. Lawson watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "You're in this whether you want to be or not. You've seen too much, and now you'll have to make a choice." Sophia looked up at him, her mind spinning. What choice? He took a step closer, his tone becoming even more measured. "You can walk away, forget everything you've seen, and pretend this never happened. Or you can stay and fight. But understand this, if you stay, you'll be fighting not just the judge, but everyone involved in this network. People who will stop at nothing to protect." Considered herself a fighter, never seen herself as someone who could stand up against powerful forces. But as she sat there, the folder in her hands, the reality of the situation began to settle in. She couldn't just walk away. Not when so much was at stake. The judge's words echoed in her mind, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." But now, she did. And she was determined to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. With a steadying breath, Sophia looked up at Mr. Lawson. "I won't walk away," she said, her voice firmer than she had expected. "I'll fight their interests." Sophia's thoughts raced. She had always been a bystander in her own life, watching the world go by without ever truly engaging. But now, everything had changed. The safety of her quiet life in Riverton had been shattered, and she couldn't pretend anymore that she didn't know what was going on. She had a choice to make, but it wasn't an easy one. If she chose to fight, she would be taking on the full weight of the town's most powerful people. She would risk everything, her job, her safety, even her daughter's well-being. But if she chose to walk away, to forget what she had learned, she would be complicit in a system of corruption that would continue to ruin lives. Sophia took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had never. Sophia's resolve hardened as she looked Mr. Lawson in the eye. The weight of her decision settled over her, as though the gravity of her words had shifted the atmosphere in the room. For a brief moment, she could see a flicker of approval in his expression, but it quickly faded, replaced by the stoic demeanor she had become accustomed to. Mr. Lawson didn't say anything right away. Instead, he nodded, acknowledging her choice. But his silence spoke volumes, as if he were preparing her for what was to come. Sophia could feel the tension in the room as it thickened, the moment pregnant with the unknown. "I should warn you," Mr. Lawson said finally, breaking the silence, "once you choose this path, there's no going back. The people we're dealing with, they don't take kindly to those who meddle in their affairs. They'll watch you, your every move, and if you slip up, they'll make sure you regret it." Sophia felt her pulse quicken, but there was no turning back. She had already seen too much. The darkness of the world the judge operated in wasn't something she could ignore, not when it had started to touch people she cared about. She had been naive, thinking she could stay on the sidelines and live her life without consequence. But that had changed the moment she stood up for Carol. "I'm ready," Sophia said, her voice steady now, though her hands still trembled slightly. "I've made my decision." Mr. Lawson stepped back slightly, his gaze never leaving her. "All right then. There's no more time to waste." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked envelope. "This is the first step. It's a meeting. You'll need to go alone." Sophia took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. Her mind was racing, the unknowns of the situation stretching out in every direction. A meeting? With who? What was she supposed to do? But she didn't ask the questions, knowing better than to show her uncertainty. She had made the choice to dive into this murky world of power, corruption, and secrecy. There was no room for hesitation now. "Who am I meeting?" she asked, though she knew she was unlikely to get a straightforward answer. "Someone who can help you understand the bigger picture," Mr. Lawson replied. "But be careful. You're walking into a den of wolves." Trust no one. Sophia nodded, the envelope now feeling like a lifeline that might pull her deeper into danger, or a tether that could drag her to safety. Where? At the old warehouse on the outskirts of town, Mr. Lawson said, his voice lowering as though even speaking of the place made it more dangerous. They'll be waiting for you there. Without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving Sophia alone with her thoughts. She stared at the envelope for a long time, her fingers tracing the edges of it, feeling the cold of the paper against her skin. The weight of the decision she had made was starting to feel like a burden, but it was one she had already committed to carrying. There was no turning back. Not now. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost dusk, and she had little time to prepare. She could feel the eyes of Riverton on her already, the town gossip already starting to churn. If she didn't leave soon, if she didn't get answers, she might never get the chance again. She had a sinking feeling that every moment she waited would only make the situation more dangerous. Without thinking, Sophia grabbed her jacket, stuffed the envelope into her purse, and headed out the door. As she drove through the familiar streets of Riverton, everything seemed quieter than usual. People were finishing their workdays, hurrying home to their families or stopping at local businesses. The small town had an undeniable charm, a sense of familiarity that made it easy to believe that nothing could truly go wrong here. But now, it felt like a facade, a false sense of security that had long since disappeared. She was entering a different world now, a world of shadows and threats, where everyone around her had their own secrets and their own hidden agendas. And yet, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was the one being watched, that eyes were on her every move. The road to the warehouse was empty, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. As she neared the outskirts of town, the familiar scenery gave way to an eerie quiet. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the dying light. The place had always seemed abandoned, a relic of the past that had been left to decay over time. It was the perfect location for a meeting like this, isolated, hidden from prying eyes. Sophia parked her car a short distance away, not wanting to draw attention to herself. The area around the warehouse was dim, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. She hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the envelope in her hand, and then she got out of the car, making her way toward the entrance. Her heart was pounding, her every instinct telling her to turn around, to leave this place and go back to her safe, predictable life. But she couldn't. She had already crossed the point of no return. The door to the warehouse creaked open as she pushed it, the sound echoing through the empty space. Inside, the air was stale, the faint scent of rust and dust hanging in the air. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, and she saw a figure standing at the far end of the room, bathed in shadows. The person didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence. "Hello?" Sophia called out, her voice sounding too loud in the silence. The figure didn't respond immediately, and for a split second, panic bubbled up inside her. But then the figure stepped forward, revealing themselves fully. It was a woman, tall and composed, with sharp features and an aura of authority that seemed to fill the room. She wore a dark coat and sunglasses, despite the fading light. There was something about her presence that was both intimidating and familiar, like she had been here longer than the warehouse itself. "You're Sophia, correct?" the woman asked, her voice calm and measured. Sophia nodded, her throat dry. "Yes. She stopped herself, unsure of how to proceed. The woman had an air of control, as though she had been expecting this meeting all along. "I'm going to help you," the woman said, her tone surprisingly gentle for someone who had such a commanding presence. "But you need to understand that the people you're up against are not like anyone you've encountered before. They are powerful, and they will stop at nothing to protect their interests." Sophia swallowed hard, the weight of her situation settling over her again. "What do I need to do?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're going to gather information. You're going to expose them for who they really are. But remember, you won't be able to do it alone. You'll need allies. And you need to decide quickly who you can trust. People will betray you. People you think you know will turn on you when the stakes get too high. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. What do you want from me? The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Your participation. Your knowledge of the town, of its people. You have connections that others don't. And you have a resolve that not many possess. Sophia didn't know what to make of the woman's words, but she knew one thing for certain: she was already in too deep. There was no turning back now. She had to see this through. But as the woman continued to speak, her words began to blur together, and all Sophia could think about was the path that lay ahead. The only thing she knew for sure was that she had chosen a side, and she had to live with that choice. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she had crossed a threshold, and there was no way out now. Sophia's breath came in short bursts as the weight of what the woman had said pressed upon her chest. She was no longer a mere observer, standing on the sidelines of the small town's mundane politics. Now, she was a player, part of a much larger and more dangerous game than she could have ever imagined. The woman in front of her, cold and calculating, had already laid the path for her. Sophia had stepped onto it unknowingly, and now there was no turning back. She took a slow, steadying breath, trying to calm the storm of questions swirling in her mind. "Who are you?" she asked, the words slipping out almost before she could stop them. "Why are you helping me?" The woman gave a soft, almost imperceptible laugh. "My name is Elena. But names don't matter here. Not really. What matters is that you're in a position to do something that no one else can. The judge, the town, it's all part of something bigger. Something much bigger than you realize. But you already know that." Sophia felt a chill run through her as Elena's words landed with a weight that threatened to crush her. She had thought she knew what was happening in Riverton, but now, every piece of the puzzle was shifting into something unrecognizable. She had never been a part of anything like this. She wasn't even sure she understood what Elena meant by something bigger. Was this about money? Power? Corruption? All she knew for sure was that everything she thought she understood about her quiet life was an illusion. "I've already been part of it," Elena continued, her tone almost as if she were speaking to herself. "We all have. The judge, the people in charge, they've been playing this game for years. But now it's time to shake things up. And you, Sophia, are going to help us do that." Sophia's mind raced, trying to catch up with the rapid pace of Elena's words. "Help you? How? I don't know anything about this game." The words felt strange to her, as if she were talking about something far removed from her own life, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. Elena's gaze was sharp, unwavering. "You know more than you think. You stood up for Carol. That was the first move. Now, we need you to find out everything you can about Judge Barnes and the others involved. The town's dirty secrets are buried deep, and it's up to you to uncover them. You can't do it alone, though. You'll need help, but you must be careful who you trust. People have their own agendas. Even those who seem like allies." Sophia felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She had no idea how to go about any of this. She had no training in espionage, no background in uncovering corruption. She was just a single mother working a dead-end job in a small town. But now she was being asked to become something else entirely, someone who could expose the powerful people who had been pulling the strings in Riverton for years. "How do I even begin?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking despite her attempt at control. Elena stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Sophia's. "You start by listening. Watch for the signs. People will talk. People always talk. The trick is knowing who to listen to, who to believe. And remember, no one is innocent here. The people who run this town, they all have skeletons in their closets. Sophia nodded, though she wasn't sure she could trust her own judgment at this point. She had been swept into a world she didn't understand, and yet, there was something undeniably compelling about Elena's words. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was her chance to make a difference, to do something that mattered, something that could change everything. But at what cost? Before she could respond, Elena handed her a small, leather-bound notebook. "Keep this with you at all times," she instructed. "Write down everything you learn. Every conversation, every detail. It will help you connect the dots. And don't forget, Judge Barnes is only the beginning." Sophia stared down at the notebook, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It seemed like such a simple object, yet she knew it represented a dangerous path. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure if she should take the leap or turn back. Elena's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You'll need to act quickly. People are already watching you, waiting to see what you do next. And trust me, there's no such thing as a small mistake in this game. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down." Sophia swallowed hard. She felt out of her depth, but the fire inside her was beginning to burn brighter. She couldn't ignore this now, not after everything she had already uncovered. This wasn't just about Carol anymore. This was about Riverton, about everything she had believed in and everything she thought was right. The truth was much darker than she could have imagined, but it was a truth she couldn't turn away from. "I'm in," Sophia said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "I'll do whatever it takes." Elena's eyes softened, just slightly, before she gave a small nod. "Good. But remember, this is just the beginning. Things will get worse before they get better. And if you ever doubt yourself, just remember this, there's no one else who can do this. Only you." With that, Elena turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the hollow space of the warehouse. Sophia stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the notebook in her hands, the weight of the decision she had made settling deeper into her bones. The world outside the warehouse seemed unchanged, but Sophia knew it would never be the same again. The quiet town she had always known felt like a distant memory now, replaced by a web of corruption and deceit that she was now part of. As she left the warehouse and stepped back into the cool evening air, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The streets of Riverton seemed eerily quiet, the soft hum of the evening breeze the only sound. But as she made her way back to her car, she realized that the weight of the world was on her shoulders now. This wasn't just about Carol anymore. This was about exposing the dark heart of Riverton itself, and Sophia had a role to play in its unraveling. In the days that followed, Sophia began her investigation, gathering every piece of information she could. She spoke with people, quietly probing for details, piecing together snippets of gossip, rumors, and unguarded confessions. It wasn't easy. Every step she took felt like walking a tightrope, the ground beneath her feet uncertain and shifting. She knew that the more she uncovered, the more dangerous things would get. But the truth had to come out. Riverton had to know what was really happening in the shadows. Each night, she sat in her small apartment, the notebook open in front of her, scribbling down everything she had learned. She was careful, methodical, and determined. But she was also terrified. She knew that with each passing day, the walls were closing in around her. There was no telling what would happen when those in power realized that someone had uncovered their secrets. But there was no turning back now. Sophia sat alone in her small apartment, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The notebook in front of her was filled with scribbled notes, names, dates, and connections that were slowly starting to form a picture of the network of corruption she was up against. Her hands ached from the constant writing, the details of what she had learned weighing heavily on her. But despite the exhaustion, she couldn't stop. She couldn't let herself rest. She was on the edge of something big, and there was no way she was going to back down now. Each day had brought more revelations, pieces of the puzzle falling into place in ways she hadn't expected. She had started to understand the depths of the corruption that ran through Riverton's local government and legal system. It wasn't just about Judge Barnes. He was the face of it, but behind him were powerful figures in business, law enforcement, and even the media. The connections ran deep, and the further Sophia dug, the more dangerous it became. The people she thought she knew, the people who had seemed so ordinary and trustworthy, were part of this intricate web. Her neighbors, the local police officers, the community leaders, every single person had their hand in the pot, taking advantage of the system, making deals in the shadows, manipulating the truth to their own benefit. The people who had the most power in Riverton weren't the ones who spoke the loudest. They were the ones who stayed hidden, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But that realization only pushed her further into the investigation. It wasn't just about bringing Judge Barnes down anymore. It was about exposing everything, about showing the town who they really were, what they were really living under. She had no idea how deep this went or how far-reaching it was, but she couldn't stop now. The fear in her heart, the anxiety that kept her up at night, was nothing compared to the anger she felt at the betrayal, the lies, and the manipulation. The hardest part, though, was learning who she could trust. Elena's warnings echoed in her mind constantly. The people she thought she could rely on were the ones who had the most to gain from keeping things the way they were. At first, she had tried to confide in a few people, friends from work, an old acquaintance from her neighborhood, but each time, she had felt the weight of their suspicion, the tightening of their words as they became more guarded. It was clear that even the most well-meaning people had their own reservations about getting involved. One night, as she sifted through the latest stack of documents she had managed to obtain, Sophia received an unexpected knock at the door. Her heart leapt into her throat as she glanced at the clock. It was already past midnight. Cautiously, she approached the door, pressing her ear against it to listen. The sound of movement on the other side was slow, deliberate. She didn't recognize the footsteps, but the urgency in the air told her it wasn't a casual visitor. She opened the door a crack, just enough to peek through. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim hallway light, was Carol. Her face was pale, eyes wide with something between fear and determination. Sophia's heart pounded. "Carol? What's wrong?" "I need to talk to you," Carol said urgently, glancing over her shoulder as though she feared someone might be watching. "It's about Judge Barnes. And the others. They know what you're doing. They're watching you, Sophia. You have to stop." Sophia stepped aside, allowing Carol into the apartment, but her mind raced. "How do you know?" she demanded, shutting the door behind them. "I haven't told anyone. Not even Elena." Carol's eyes flickered, her hands trembling as she sat down on the couch. "I overheard something today. A conversation between two of the town's most powerful figures. I don't know everything, but I know enough. They know you're digging into things. And they don't like it." Sophia sat down across from her, trying to steady her breath. "Who?" Carol hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Sheriff Wilkins. And someone else. I don't know who exactly, but they were talking about you. About how you've been asking questions, making connections. They're getting nervous." A cold shiver ran down Sophia's spine. She had suspected that someone was following her, watching her every move, but hearing Carol confirm it made it all too real. She was no longer just an innocent bystander in this. She had become a target. "I can't stop now," Sophia said, her voice more firm than she felt. "Too much is at stake. I have to keep going." Carol shook her head. "You don't understand. These people don't play by the rules. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe. If they find out how much you know," she broke off, her eyes wide with fear. Sophia, you don't know what they're capable of. I've seen it. I've heard it. Sophia leaned forward, her fingers curling around the edges of the notebook in front of her. I'm not going to back down. They've hurt too many people already. I can't be afraid of them anymore. Carol's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. You don't have a choice. Not anymore. They've made it personal. And they won't stop until they destroy you. Sophia felt the weight of her words settle in, but she refused to let the fear overwhelm her. She had already come this far. She had seen the depth of the corruption, had heard the whispers of people who were too afraid to act. She couldn't be another bystander. She wouldn't let fear rule her. You're right, Sophia said quietly. They're watching me. But they don't know how far I'm willing to go. And neither do you. She stood up, her movement steady as she grabbed the notebook. I've already made my decision. And I'm not going to let them stop me. If they want a fight, they'll get one. Carol looked up at her, a mixture of worry and admiration in her eyes. You're not the same person you were, Sophia. You've changed. This is no longer just about the town. It's about everything. Sophia nodded, her mind already racing ahead, planning the next steps. I know. And that's what scares them. The tension in the room was thick, but Sophia felt something within her click into place. She had known all along that the path she was on wouldn't be easy. The people she had trusted would turn on her, the threats would become more direct, and the stakes would continue to rise. But she also knew one thing, she couldn't stop. If she did, it would be like giving in, allowing them to continue with their lies, their corruption, and their destruction of everything she had believed in. She wasn't going to let them win. The next few days were a blur of activity. Sophia kept to herself, trying to avoid drawing too much attention. But with each passing hour, she could feel the pressure building. Her every movement seemed to be watched, her every word scrutinized. She knew that time was running out. She kept going, though. Day after day, she gathered more information, talked to more people, and pieced together the puzzle. She had begun to see patterns, connections she hadn't noticed before. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how much bigger this conspiracy was than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about Judge Barnes. It was about control. About power. About keeping Riverton, keeping the world, under the thumb of a select few. And Sophia was the one who was going to tear it all down. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. Her phone had started to buzz with strange numbers, the emails coming in with cryptic threats. Stay out of it, or else. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. It was clear they were trying to intimidate her, to scare her off. But she wasn't afraid anymore. If they thought she was going to back down, they didn't understand her at all. The end was drawing near, and Sophia could feel it. The final pieces were falling into place, and soon, she would be ready to expose everything. But as she sat at her desk late one night, staring at the evidence she had gathered, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if exposing everything wasn't enough? What if, in the end, the truth wasn't enough to bring them down? The thought lingered, haunting her as she wrote in the notebook, her final thoughts escaping her pen. She had come this far. But how much further would she have to go to see this through? And who would she become in the process?